Okay, guys, so let's continue looking at household consumption spending given by capital letter C there. Okay, so in this module, as well as in macroeconomics in general, the capital letter C is reserved for household consumption spending. So what is household consumption spending? It is basically, basically refers to spending on consumer goods, that is goods and services purchased for final consumption by individuals, consumers, or household. Okay, so you really need to understand what consumer goods are. So consumer goods are those goods and services that are purchased for final consumption. What does that mean? It basically means the good has reached its final stage of the production process. It doesn't need to be transformed into anything, but it is ready to satisfy the needs of the consumer, the needs or the wants of the consumer. Okay, so what are examples of consumer goods do we have? Okay, so we've got bedding stuff, okay, such as your sheets, your bed, the bed itself, your mattresses, the pillows. Okay, you can see that the pillows, they are ready for final consumption. When you put your head on top of the pillow, it basically means that that's final consumption spending. Same applies with the bed, the TV sets. Okay, yeah, once you've got a TV set, you don't have a TV set or a television in your home, you don't need to transform it to anything else. You can basically watch it and satisfy your needs or your wants. Okay, refrigerators, motor vehicles, groceries. So all those are different types of consumer goods. So when you're looking at household consumption spending, we're basically just looking at the spending on goods and services that are ready for final consumption. Tip: the purchase of homes or houses, known as residential spending by household, is not classified as part of household consumption spending, but is classified as part of investment spending. What really happening here is that when you look at these goods and services, okay, when you look at these consumer products or consumer goods, consumers, they either in other words, they are either destroyed immediately in the consumption process. If they are not destroyed immediately in the consumption process, they're going to provide they're going to provide satisfaction for a relatively short period of time. For instance, motor vehicles, it's generally between 5 to 7 years. Okay, a motor vehicle is fully consumed up. For TV sets, yes, of course, it could go for a few years. Some of them could go maybe 5-10 years. Okay, depending on how careful you are in terms of handling that TV set, but you're not going to have a TV set for generations. Same applies to the bedding stuff. Okay, groceries, refrigerators, it's exactly the same stuff. The consumption, it's immediate, or the product is destroyed immediately, or for a relatively short period of time. But when you look at the purchase of homes, which is residential spending, okay, if someone pays or if someone purchases a home, okay, that home, it's going to last for generations. The consumption, it's not immediate and it's not for a relatively short period of time, but the consumer or the household is going to be enjoying, or it's going to be receiving satisfaction from the house for a relatively long period of time. For instance, sometimes it could be more than 30 years, 50 years, or even for generations. Okay, so the spending on household, or the satisfaction that household receive from residential or from household, it's not typical of the satisfaction that household will receive from these other types of consumer goods. That's why in macroeconomics, residential spending, that is the purchase of new and old homes, is not classified as consumer goods. So you really need to be very careful when you're looking at, or when you're analyzing at household consumption spending. Just know that residential spending is really not included as part of household consumption spending. And there could be multiple choice questions that will try to trick you whether you really do understand what residential spending is all about. You just need to know that it is not part of household consumption spending, but it's classified as part of investment spending. Okay, note, household consumption spending, or simply consumption spending, has two major components here. Okay, so you might hear me sometimes I'll simply say consumption spending or household consumption spending, but just need to know that we're referring to household consumption spending. If I simply say consumption spending, I will be referring to household consumption spending. Okay, so we are saying it has got two major components. What are those components? It is autonomous consumption spending, or it is so the first component of household household consumption spending, it is autonomous consumption spending, which is given by C bar here. Okay, that is C bar. Okay, you can see there's a little bar on top of this C then. Okay, that's a capital letter C, or it could be a small letter C, but as long as there's a bar on top of it, it is known as, or it signifies autonomous consumption spending. The second component of household consumption spending is what is known as induced consumption spending. Okay, so induced consumption spending has got two components. There's this small c there and YD. So this small c there is known as the marginal propensity to consume. We will discuss more later about the marginal propensity to consume. And it's also known as the slope of the function of the consumption function, but we'll discuss more about the the marginal propensity to consume, or this small letter c. The second component of induced consumption spending is YD there, and YD basically represent disposable income. Okay, and what is disposable income? Disposable income is really that income a consumer remains with after paying tax. In other words, the consumer is free to dispose of that income in any way they want. If you have got 100 rand as your gross income, you are not free to spend that 100 rands in whatever way you want, okay, before you pay tax. Okay, so before you pay tax, you are not free to spend this income in whatever way, because if you do so before paying tax, SARS is going to really come after you with its long teeth to deal with you. So because you know that SARS has got long teeth, so you're really not so free to spend that income. And then maybe you're going to pay 10 rand tax. Okay, so after paying tax, you've got 90 rand. Okay, and we are saying this 90 rand, because you've already paid tax and now you're free from SARS long teeth. It basically means that this is your disposable income, meaning you can spend it in whatever way you want. Okay, so we are saying induced consumption spending is really a product of this small letter c, which is marginal propensity to consume, multiplied by disposable income. So all of this is what is known as induced consumption spending, but we will unpack even further in more detail what really is happening here, or what really is induced consumption spending. But what is happening here, guys, is that we want to understand how income is influenced by aggregate demand. Okay, but we say that in a simple Keynesian model, aggregate demand has got two components. There's consumption spending plus investment spending. And here now we're saying that, okay, consumption spending really has got two components. Okay, the first one is autonomous consumption spending. The second one is induced consumption spending. Okay, so if we understand what determines autonomous consumption spending, then we are going to know how autonomous consumption spending really influences total household consumption spending. At the same time, if we understand induced consumption spending, we're going to know how does induced consumption spending really influences total household consumption. So if we understand what determines autonomous consumption spending, and we also understand what determines induced consumption spending, then we're going to understand how sort of household consumption spending is determined, or on what factors, on what variables does household consumption spending depends on. So once we understand the factors that influences, or the factors that influence total household consumption spending, then we're going to understand how changes in household consumption spending are going to affect aggregate demand. And because we know that income depends on aggregate demand, any changes on aggregate demand are going to be reflected on changes in income. So that's really what is happening here. Please do not lose the big picture of what we're really trying to do. So once you're done analyzing household consumption spending, we're then going to go on to looking at investment spending. Okay, so let's look at the framework that we're going to be using in terms of analyzing household consumption spending. We're going to look at these two components of household consumption spending as a consumption function. And what really a consumption function it's all about is it takes total household consumption spending. So this capital letter C is reserved for household consumption spending. And then we say that this household consumption spending can be divided into two components, okay, or it can be attributed into two components, okay. The first component, it is autonomous consumption spending given by C bar then. But the second component of this total household consumption is really induced consumption spending. So this is what we're going to be analyzing it and see how does it affect aggregate demand. In other words, what affects autonomous aggregate spending, what autonomous household consumption spending, and also what affects induced household consumption spending, and then we then going to translate that understanding to analyzing aggregate demand. So this is known as the consumption function. This is known as this consumption function, and this one is the slope of the consumption function. We'll discuss this one in more detail. Okay, so let's look at the components of the consumption function in more detail one by one. So we're going to first of all look at autonomous consumption given by C bar then. Okay, so we're saying that autonomous consumption represents the minimum level of household consumption which is not dependent on or is not financed from current disposable income. Okay, so maybe let's sort of start ahead and then come backwards. So when you want to consume, guys, what do you use? Okay, if you want to purchase goods and services, what are you going to use? We use your income. Okay, because I mean, how are you going to consume if you don't have your income? Okay, so in most cases, or in most parts, okay, or for the larger part, consumption is dependent on how much an individual earns in terms of their income. Okay, we know that people who have got a high income, they consume a lot, they purchase expensive cars, they live in posh neighborhoods, they send their kids to expensive schools. Okay, why are they affording that? How are they affording that really expensive level of consumption? It's because they've got high income. But when you look closely at household consumption spending, you're going to realize that there are some people who do not earn any income. Okay, they are not employed, they're not working, they don't have properties to receive rentals from, they don't even have any investment to be receiving any profit, but they are still consuming. Okay, does it mean if you're not employed, you're not earning any income, you are going to die? No, that's not the case. That's not the case. So there's always that minimum level. There's that minimum level for household consumption spending, which is not dependent on income, or which is not dependent on how much an individual earns in terms of income. Okay, so that minimum level of consumption, which does not depend on your income, it's known as autonomous consumption spending. And as a result, because it does not depend on the level of income, we're saying that autonomous consumption, the reason it is known as autonomous, it is because autonomous, the word autonomous simply means independent. Okay, you can see not dependent, and independent means not dependent. Autonomous means independent. Independent means not dependent. Not dependent on what? On disposable income. So it doesn't matter how much is your disposable income, you want to maintain a certain minimum level of consumption regardless of what your income is. Okay, so even if your income is equal to zero, as is the case with people that are not earning income, they're not employed. Okay, but we're saying your consumption is not going to be zero, because if your consumption is equal to zero, then it means you are basically a dead person. But we see a lot of people, unemployed people, they're still alive, meaning there's still at a minimum level of consumption that they have. Okay, so let's look at an example for autonomous consumption spending. So for instance, here we've got C bar, which is autonomous consumption spending, is equal to 20 million. So we are saying, what does this mean? This basically means that even if their income is equal to zero, you can see that YD, which is disposable income, is equal to zero. Even if this person does not have any income, their minimum level of consumption is going to be 20 million. In other words, they're going to be purchasing goods and services that are worth 20 million within a given time period. It could be 1 year. I mean, I know this figure looks like it's a lot. I said that, okay, this person does not earn any income, but their minimum level of consumption, it's equal to 20 million, but that's just for explanation purposes. In most cases, autonomous consumption is not really that big. The largest part of consumption, it's really financed through disposable income. Okay, but let's see the point that I'm trying to make, whereby I say that autonomous consumption spending does not depend on the level of income. Even if your income is equal to zero, your consumption is not going to be equal to zero. So remember, this is our consumption function there. Okay, so consumption, total household consumption, it's a function of, or it's equal to autonomous household consumption plus induced household consumption. So let's just put the figures that we have here. Okay, from this example, let's just slot in the figures that we are given. Okay, we're given that autonomous household consumption. Okay, this one is equal to 200 million. So wherever there's C bar, we're just going to put 200 million. Okay, and then CYT, we know that the consumption functioning is also this component which is induced consumption spending. So it doesn't matter whether we've got C, or it doesn't matter what the value of C is in this example, but we know that, okay, what is disposable income? Disposable income is equal to 0, so we can simply multiply C by 0, and we know that a number multiplied by 0, it doesn't matter whatever the value of C is, this one is going to fall out and become 0. So we just solve this one, we can see that even if our income, even if the income of the consumer is equal to 0, consumption, okay, that is total consumption by the consumer, is not equal to 0, but it's equal to 20 million, which is equal to autonomous household consumption spending. So we can illustrate autonomous household consumption spending on a graph, whereby on the horizontal axis we've got income, okay, that is the level of income, how much income an individual earns or makes in a given time period, and then on the vertical axis we've got the level of consumption. In other words, how much a consumer is really spending in a given time period. This could be 1 month, okay, it could be 1 year, but just for simplicity, you can assume a time period. Okay, let's just assume this is 1 year. So in 1 year, we're saying that the horizontal axis is going to be measuring the income a consumer earns or makes in a 1 year period. On the vertical axis, we're going to be measuring the level of consumption for that consumer who earns a given level of income and how much are they going to be consuming in a given time period. Okay, but with regard to autonomous consumption spending, we are saying this level of consumption is not dependent on, or it's not financed from current income or from your current disposable income. In other words, it doesn't matter how much income you have. It doesn't change. It doesn't vary with the level of your current disposable income. For instance, let's say we know that this is the origin, therefore income is equal to 0. So at this level of income, when income is equal to 0, what is your autonomous consumption spending? You can say, how are you going to know or to read off autonomous consumption spending or total consumption spending in general? So you're going to move from this point all the way until you intersect the consumption function. So the only component of consumption that we have here is autonomous consumption spend. So when income is equal to 0, consumption or total consumption is going to be equal to 200 million. Okay, let's say that income rises to this point, whatever the level of income is going to be at this point. What is the level of consumption for this consumer? We're going to move from this level, go vertical until we intersect the the consumption function, in which case the consumption function is really just autonomous consumption spending. Okay, so here you see the level of consumption for this individual. How much are they consuming? So once we intersect the consumption function, let's go all the way to the vertical axis. We can see that they're consuming 200 million, which is exactly the same as they were consuming when their income was equal to 0. So we can keep on increasing our income. We can see that the level of consumption is not changing as income increases, because as we're increasing our income, so as we're moving to the right hand side, the level of income is increasing, but the level of consumption is really fixed at 200 million. Even if we decrease our income, we can see that the level of consumption does not change as income changes. Therefore, that's where the autonomous or the autonomic comes in, meaning to say this level of consumption is not dependent on how much an individual really has. Okay, so what it determines sort of autonomous consumption spending, it's a lot of things. It could be, for instance, past savings. Okay, maybe you're saying that, okay, because I've got this amount of savings, and then this is how much I'm going to be consuming. People that have got a lot of prior savings, they're going to have high level of autonomous consumption spending. People that do not have past savings, they are really going to have lower autonomous consumption spending. Also, this could it depends on the lifestyle. Okay, some people have got a very expensive lifestyle. So if someone has got a very expensive lifestyle, it doesn't matter what their level of income. We have seen that one amongst celebrities. So we've had a lot of celebrities that are really struggling. Why? Because their income is very low. But now, because they have got a certain lifestyle which they have to make sure that they maintain, okay, you are going to find that their autonomous consumption is going to be quite very high. But I mean, this autonomous consumption has to be financed from out of something. A lot of those celebrities, you find that they don't have a saving, they don't have past savings. And that's why at the end of the day, for some of the celebrities who are not so fortunate, things can become quite very bad in a relatively short period of time because of this expensive lifestyle, which is not financed by their current consumption, sorry, by their current disposable income. But anyway, the main point here, ladies and gentlemen, is that autonomous consumption does not depend on the level of income. Okay, let's move on to the next component of household consumption spending, which is induced consumption given by CYD. So later on, we're just going to drop this D and just write the consumption function as C. That is total household consumption function is called C bar plus C Y. We just need to know that we are referring to current disposable income whenever it's CY. So to make the consumption function appear even neater, we're just going to drop this D later on. Okay, I don't know where exactly we're going to drop it, but in case we drop it, just know that we're referring to disposable income whenever we're discussing the consumption function or household consumption spending. Okay. So what is induced consumption spending? Okay, induced consumption spending basically refers to the portion of current household spending which is dependent on or is financed from current disposable income. That is the income a consumer expects to earn in a given period of time. Let's say you are earning, let's say 20,000 in a month. Okay, out of this 20,000, how much are you going to spend? So we know that if your income increases, generally consumption also increases. That's what happens. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys have heard people say that when I was earning something like 4,000, all my expenses were covered. I was fine. I didn't have any problem. But now I'm earning something like 30,000, but I've got a lot of expenses. It's just second day of the month. I don't have any money left. Why? It's because generally what happens is when income increases, a person's consumption level also increases. That's why they start buying expensive things. They're now living in expensive apartments. They're now driving expensive cars. They're even eating expensive food. And at the end of the day, they cry and say, okay, I don't know what's really happening, but my income is not even enough anymore, but I'm earning a lot. It's because when income rises, general consumption rises. And that level of consumption, which depends on the level of income, is known as induced consumption spending. Okay, and so it depends on the amount of income a person expects to earn or a person is really earning in a given time period. That time period could be a month. How much you earn in a month is also going to determine how much you consume in a month. How much you earn in a given year is also going to determine how much you consume in that particular year. Okay, so let's look at the framework for induced consumption spending. We saw that the framework for autonomous consumption spending is that it is horizontal. The level of autonomous consumption spending does not change as the level of income changes. But with the induced consumption spending, we can see that when disposable income is equal to zero, consumption spending is also going to be equal to zero. So on the vertical axis, we are measuring the level of consumption. On the horizontal axis, we're measuring the level of income. Okay, so if your income is equal to zero, okay, induced consumption spending is also going to be equal to zero. But let's increase our income from 0 to Y1. What is going to be our level of consumption? How are you going to know that? We're going to move from the income axis all the way until we intersect this line, which represent the consumption line. Okay, and then we go to the vertical axis until we read off our consumption. So we can see that our consumption is really going to be equal to C1. Let's keep on raising our income to Y2. What is going to be the level of consumption? We're really going to move from this axis, okay, from the horizontal axis all the way until we intersect this line, which represents the consumption function. And then we go to the vertical axis, and then we're going to read off our consumption there. So you can see that as income increases, okay, as income kept on increasing, consumption also kept on increasing. Okay, you can look at things from a different perspective or from an opposite end. Let's say you started Y2. So if income is Y2, then your consumption is called to C2. If income decreases to Y1, and then we can see consumption is also going to decrease to sort of C1. So if income is equal to 0, then consumption is going to be 0. This person is not spending anything because they don't have any income. So that induced consumption is going to be equal to 0. But the bottom line or the major point is that induced consumption spending depends on the level of income. If income increases, then your your consumption is going to increase. Now the next question then is what is going to determine the income? Okay, there are a lot of things that determines why people earn more income while others earn less. It could be the level of education. Okay, in some cases, some studies have also established sex. Okay, we know there are a lot of studies that have actually established that males sometimes they earn more income for this, more salaries for the same level of occupation or for the same position in employment. Same applies to race. We've also had all those sorts of things. It could also be years of experience. People with loads of experience, they tend to be paid more, okay, or they tend to be paid higher than graduates. So all those things that determine income, they're then going to determine consumption, and then that's also going to determine the demand. So if you're in a society where there's a lot of educated people, those educated people are really going to be earning a lot of income, and those educated people, they're also going to be demanding a lot of goods and services, expensive products, okay. And that's also going to motivate the production of expensive product to meet the consumption needs of those educated people. But if you are living in a society where people do not really have a high level of education, you're going to realize that, okay, those people, they don't earn much. And as a result, they are not really going to be demanding expensive product, expensive things like eating or dining in expensive restaurants and consuming or eating expensive food. They're really just going to be consuming at the bare minimum. And that's also going to drive the level of production. You're going to see that there's not going to be a supply for expensive food, because I mean, who's going to purchase those expensive food or expensive products? Because those people in that society or in that locality, they don't afford it. Okay, so that's induced consumption spending. Not if income increases from Y1 to Y2, consumption is just to increase from C1 to C2. This shows that consumption is positively related to real income. So real income basically means that we have affected inflation. Okay, so before we separate inflation, it is known as nominal income. But if we factor in inflation, then we've got real income. Okay, so we're saying that I think this is already what I've already explained. So if income increases, consumption is just to also increase, meaning consumption and income, they vary positively. Okay, so the slope of the consumption function, is given by C, that small letter C, and is referred to as the marginal propensity to consume. I've already mentioned earlier on that the slope of the consumption function is known as that C, which is attached to income, is known as the marginal propensity to consume. And what is the marginal propensity to consume? The MPC measures the proportion of current income that an individual will spend on current consumption if their income were to change by 1 unit here. Okay, that 1 unit could be anything. It could be 1 rand or $1. It depends on the the unit or the currency in which your income is being really measured. But we are saying, when you look at an individual who is earning 100 rands, they are not going to consume the entire 100 rands. You're earning 100 rands in 1 month. Are you going to blow that 100 rands? Maybe that 100 rands is not really much. Let's say that you're earning 12,000 rand per month. Are you going to chow all that 12,000 in May and then say, okay, what are you going to consume in June? I'm going to consume whatever I'm going to receive in June. That's not really how people consume from what we observe. What really happens is that individuals, they're going to say, for every amount that I receive in each month, this is how much I'm going to consume. Okay, this is how much I'm going to consume, and then maybe the remainder I'm going to save it. Someone might say that, okay, since I'm earning 12,000 rand, I'm going to be spending 10,000 rand on consumption, that is buying goods and services. and then I'm going to be saving 2,000 rands. So the marginal propensity to consume, which is the slope of the consumption function, it's really going to be the proportion of, or yes, it's going to be the proportion of total income which is spent on consumption. What is that proportion? It's going to be 10,000. That is the amount of income which is spent on consumption as a proportion of total income. What is your total income? Your total income is going to be 12,000. And sort of your income that you're spending on consumption, it's really equals to 10,000. So if you express this income which you're spending on consumption as a proportion, or you divide it by your total income, you're really going to get, I think that's going to be 0.833, something like 8%. So this individual is really saying that, again, if I receive 10,000, sorry, if I receive 12,000, I'm going to spend 0.833 or 83% of that 12,000 on consumption. And then the remainder 2,000, which is close to 20%, I'm going to save it. It doesn't matter, even if I receive 12 rand, this individual is going to consume 83% of 12 rand, which is supposed to be 10 rand. And then what is going to happen to the 2 rand? They're going to save. So if you express this 10 rand as a proportion of the total income, you're still going to get 0.833% or 83.3%. Even if you say that, okay, this individual is really earning sort of 1 rand. Okay, so if they earn 1 rand, we're saying, okay, this individual is going to say that, okay, out of this 1 rand, I'm only going to consume 0.833 or whatever, or 83.3% of this 1 rand, and then the rest I'm going to save it. So this proportion of income, okay, this proportion of income which is spent on current consumption, for every 1 rand of income received, is known as the marginal propensity to consume. So marginal basically means 1. So if you earn 1 rand, what is that proportion of income, or what is that proportion of 1 rand which are going to consume? Okay, and in most cases, this is how individuals really behave. They always have that sort of marginal propensity to consume, in mention that this is how much I'm going to consume out of every 1 rand that I receive. The rest I'm going to save it. Okay, so here is the formula for the marginal propensity to consume. We're saying that, okay, it is the proportion of income, okay, that is the change in consumption divided by the change in income. So in other words, how do you interpret this one? Delta C is simply the change in consumption. Okay, so the symbol, this triangle here, is known as delta, and it represents change, as we have been discussing previously. So the marginal propensity to consume is simply the change in your consumption as a result of your change in income. So let's say that you were earning 10,000, and then your income increases to 15,000. Okay, so what is the change in your income? So your change in income is simply going to be 15,000 minus 10,000. So your change in income, okay, that is delta Y, is going to be 5,000. Let's say that when you were sort of earning 10,000, you were consuming 80% of that 10,000. That is, you were consuming 8,000. But now, after your income is increased to 15,000, you are still going to be consuming 80% of that 15,000, which is going to be something like 12,000. Okay, so what is the change in your consumption? It's going to be 12,000 minus 8,000. That is 4,000. So your marginal propensity to consume, so your change in consumption is going to be 4,000. Okay, so your marginal propensity to consume, your MPC, is going to be the change in consumption, which is 4,000, divided by the change in income, which is 5,000. Okay, so the change in income, so there's going to be, what is your change in consumption? It's 4,000. Okay, and what is your change in income? Your income is changed by 5,000. In other words, your income is increased by 5,000. So you're going to divide by 5,000, and that's going to give us 0.8. Okay, so this 0.8 is really your marginal propensity to consume. That is the change in income divided by, so the change in consumption divided by the change in income. Okay, so C, the small c there is the MPC, which is also the slope of the consumption function. And delta C, it is the change in current consumption. Delta C, delta Y, it is the change in your current income. So let's just look at another example here to really understand what is happening with regard to the marginal propensity to consume, because this is really something which is very, very important. We're going to need the marginal propensity to consume to calculate the multiplier, one of the really important problems that we're going to be dealing with in macroeconomics. So you really have to, if you want to understand the multiplier, you first of all need to understand the marginal propensity to consume, because that's one of the terms that we're going to need to calculate the multiplier. Okay, so let's look at an example here. We're saying that this is the consumption function. So we're just looking at the we're just looking at induced consumption. Okay, so what is our induced consumption? Okay, that is our total consumption here. It's basically made up or entirely made up of induced consumption. Okay, because we don't have autonomous consumption, so we can see that as our income increases, our consumption is also increasing. So let's assume that initially our income was equal to 100. We want to calculate the marginal propensity to consume, because the question sometimes might ask you to or might test you whether you are able to calculate the marginal propensity to consume. Okay, so you need to know that formula, the change in consumption divided by the change in income. That's going to give you your marginal propensity to consume. So let's say that initially your income was equal to 100 rands, and when your income was equal to 100 rands, how much were you consuming? You're going to move from the income axis, go vertical until you meet the consumption line, and then you go vertically to the consumption axis. So when income is equal to 100 rands, you're consuming 80 rand. Okay, and then your income increases. Your income increases from 100 rands to 120. Okay, and also we can see that your consumption has also increased. Okay, so your consumption has increased from 80 rand to 96. Okay, and therefore, what is the change in what is the marginal propensity to consume? In other words, what is the slope of this line? What is the slope of this line, which is given by this small letter C there? What is the marginal propensity to consume? Okay, and remember I say that how do we calculate the marginal propensity to consume? It's simply going to be the change in consumption divided by the change in income. So it is just a matter of calculating the change in consumption and dividing it by the change in income. Okay, so step number one, let's calculate the change in consumption, delta C. Okay, so our consumption is increasing from 80 to 96. What is the change? So the change is going to be the new level of consumption minus the old level of consumption, which is 96 minus 96 minus 80, which is going to be 16. Okay, so the change in consumption is equal to 16. What about the change in income? Okay, that's what delta C is representing then. Okay, it is just the distance between the new level of consumption and the old level of consumption. Same applies. The change in income is the difference between the new level of consumption and the new level of income and the old level of income. Okay, delta Y. So it's going to be 120 minus 100. So to calculate the MPC, we're simply going to take the difference between the new level of consumption and the old level of income, because we know that is the change in consumption, or delta C, and then we divide it by the new level of income minus the old level of income. We know that is equal to delta Y. Okay, and then let's just put the numbers there. What is C2? What is the new level of consumption? It is 96. What is C1? Okay, C1 there, which is the old level of consumption. It is 80. And then what is Y2, which is the new level of income? It is 120. What is Y1, which is the old level of income? It is 100. And then once you solve this one, you're going to see that, okay, the change in consumption relative to the change in income is really going to be equal to 0.8 or 80%. That basically means that this individual consumes 80% out of every income which they receive. Okay, this individual is going to be consuming 80% out of every income that they receive. Okay, so you can see that this 80, which is the level of induced consumption, is equal to 80% of 100 rands. I mean, if you calculate 80% of 100 rands, you're going to get 80 rand. Same applies. Excuse me. if you calculate 80% of 120, it is going to give you 96 rand. So even if you calculate the change in income, okay, so the change in consumption, okay, the change in consumption from 80 to 96 is going to be 80% of the change in income. So the change in income here, it's it's 20, okay. The change in income is really going to be equal to 20, and that's going to be 0.8 or 80% of the change in income. Okay. Okay, let me repeat that one. I think I mixed up. So I'm simply saying that the change in consumption, okay, from 80 to 96 is going to be 80% of the change in income from 100 to 120 rands. Okay, so that's how you calculate the marginal propensity to consume. Okay. 3, as income increases, consumption increases, but the increase in income is less than the increase in total income. So that's another thing that we can notice then. So we can see that our income really increased by 20 million rand. Okay, so our income rose from 100 to 120. Okay, so the increase in income is really equals to 20 million rand. But on the other hand, the increase in consumption is not equal to the increase in income. It is actually less than the increase in income, because consumption is really just increasing by 16 million. That's what this statement is saying, that as income increases, consumption increases, but that increase in consumption is going to be less than the increase in total income. So what basically this means is that the consumer is not going to consume all of that. It's not going to take that entire 20 million and then consume all of it. No, it's all, the consumer is really just going to take a certain proportion out of an increase in income and spend it on consumption. And how much is the consumer consuming? The consumer is going to consume only 16 million out of this extra 20 million which they are making. Okay, so let's just use this formula that we had above, that okay, the marginal propensity to consume is really the change in consumption divided by the change in income, and we know that the change in consumption is 16 million. Okay, we put our 16 million divided by the change in income. We know the change in income is really equal to 20 million. That's going to be equal to 0.8 million. So what this piece is just 0.8. What this basically means is that if income increases by 1 rand, okay, the consumer is just going to consume 0.8 rands. In other words, the consumer is going to consume 80 cents. Okay, the consumer is not going to consume all this extra 1 rand which they earn in income. They are going to consume only 0.8 rand. In other words, 80 cents. Okay, so you can see that if income increases by 1 rand, the consumption is going to increase by 0.8 rand, that is 8 cents. Okay, so let's see the relationship. So in other words, why is this important? We're saying that if we know the marginal propensity to consume and we're given the change in income, then from this information we will be able to predict the new level of income, sorry, the new level of consumption. Let me repeat. If we're given the marginal propensity to consume, in other words, how much the consumer is going to consume out of every extra 1 rand they're going to receive, and we also know the total new income the consumer has, then we're going to be able to calculate the total change in consumption. In other words, how much is going to be the new level of consumption for the consumer. Okay, so what we simply need to do out of this expression here, we just need to isolate delta C, that is the change in consumption, and make it subject of the formula. Okay, we just have to make it subject of the formula, in other words, isolate it. Okay, so what is going to happen is that we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by delta y. Okay, multiply by delta y. So delta y into delta y, this is going to be 1, and 1 into any number, it is going to be whatever that number is. So here we've got on the right hand side, it's going to be 0.8, because we say 16 divided by 20 is going to give us 0.8, and then multiply by this delta y. So we can see that on the left-hand side, we're simply going to remain with delta C. And therefore, delta C, which is the change in consumption, is going to be 0.8, which is the marginal propensity to consume multiplied by the change in income. So this basically means that if you're given the marginal propensity to consume, in other words, the proportion that a consumer is going to spend on consumption out of every income or out of every unit of income they receive, and you're also given the change in income, you will be able to calculate the change in consumption. Okay, overall, so household consumption is made up of two components, as we discussed earlier on. The first one being autonomous consumption, and the second one being induced consumption. So we can put the two components of household consumption spending together to have the full consumption function. And we basically going to use this graph here. So as you can see, as here we've got firstly, we have got this level of consumption, which does not depend on income. So this horizontal line here represent autonomous household consumption. On the other hand, this one represents the full consumption function. So what we can see is that the consumption function does not start at zero. The reason why it doesn't start at zero is because, as we say, that the consumption level of the consumer is always going to include this level of consumption. It does not depend on income. So that's why the entire consumption function is really starting at this level of autonomous consumption function, and then it rises with the level of income. So we can see here what is the full consumption function. It is equal to 20, whereby 20 represent autonomous consumption function, and then plus CY, whereby CY represent induced consumption spending. Okay. Number 5, if other factors that determine consumption do not change, a change in income will result in a movement along the graph for the consumption function. Okay. So earlier on, I said that autonomous consumption spending, it represents the level of consumption which is dependent on income. In other words, say that if income increases, consumption is also going to increase. But there are also other important factors that determine the level of consumption other than income. So we are saying if those other factors do not change, and let me take you one step backwards. So those other factors that determine consumption, such as past savings, lifestyles, size of household, and so forth, okay, they are all represented by this autonomous level of consumption, okay? On the other hand, the level of consumption, which depends on income, is represented by this term. So what we're saying here is if any of those factors if all those factors were to remain constant, in other words, they are not changing, okay? The size of household is not changing, your lifestyle is not changing, your past savings are also not changing, your future expectations are not changing, okay? But the only thing which is changing is your level of income. We're saying if income changes, then we're going to observe a movement along the entire consumption function. So you might meet a multiple choice question which says that what causes a movement along the consumption function. You need to know that it is a change in income while it's holding other factors or other determinants of consumption constant. Okay, so let's see a movement along the consumption function. How exactly do we illustrate a movement along the consumption function? Okay. So remember this entire line here, it represents the level of consumption as income increases or given a certain level of income. So we are saying that we are only going to observe a movement along this consumption function. Remember, this line represents the consumption function. So there's going to be a movement only if income changes, while these other factors that determine consumption remain constant. Okay, so what does this mean? Remember, if this is level of income and this is going to be the level of consumption, meaning we are at this point, that is at point A on the consumption function. So if income increases, okay, so you can see that if we move from Y0 to Y1, it shows that income is changing. Okay, so income is changing from Y0 to Y1. What is happening to consumption? Consumption is also changing from C0 to C1. Okay, so where are we going to end on this consumption function? We are going to end at this point. So we moved from point A to point B, okay, which is along the consumption function. But what caused us to move from point A to point B? It is because of a change in income, okay? Other factors, they are remaining the same. They are not what? They are not changing. So only a change in income is what is going to lead to a movement along the consumption function, okay? Number 6, a change in any of the factors that determine consumption other than income. So these are some of the other factors that determine the level of consumption, such as the wealth, in other words, how much assets have you accumulated, habits, expectation, demographic factors, etc. So if any of these factors were to change, but income remains constant this time, then we are going to observe a shift of the entire consumption function. With a change in income, there's going to be a movement along the consumption function. But if any of the factors if any of the factors that determine consumption were to change, but income remains constant, and then the entire consumption function is really going to shift. So let's look at this framework or example here. So initially, this is the level of autonomous consumption spending, and this is the entire consumption function. You can see that C0, which is the first consumption function, is made up of two components, that is autonomous consumption spending plus in just consumption spending. Really, this one is supposed to be C0 here, but it doesn't really make much difference, okay? But now we're saying if any of the factors, such as maybe the wealth of the consumer, in other words, let's assume that this person's wealth has increased, okay? So what is going to happen? It simply means that also the level of autonomous consumption is also going to shift, okay? So you can see autonomous consumption is shifting from C bar 0 to C bar 1, okay? And also the entire consumption function is also going to shift in a parallel manner, because what is really happening here is that the slope of the consumption function is not changing. So the slope of the consumption function is only going to change if the marginal propensity to consume were to change. And also we're only going to move if it was if it is the income that changed, then we're going to observe a movement along the consumption function. But now, because it is other factors of consumption or other factors or other variables that determine consumption, which are all included or embedded in autonomous consumption function, they're the ones that are changing. That's why we are observing a shifting of the entire consumption function. In other words, we are saying that all these other factors, such as your wealth, your habits, your expectation, demographic factors, they are all contained in autonomous consumption function. So if any of those factors were to change, then we are going to observe the level of autonomous consumption function also changing. So that's exactly what is happening here. And this is, you can see, this is the new level of consumption. So C1 is the new level of consumption being made up of the new level of autonomous consumption spending, which is this point here, plus industrial consumption spending, which is CY, okay? But I mean, we have not really, income is not changing. We're saying income is the same, and therefore also the marginal propensity to change is the same. So that's why there's really a parallel shift in the entire consumption function, meaning to say that the distance from this point to this point is exactly equal to this to the distance from this point to this point, because of parallel shift in the entire consumption function, okay? Now let's look at the relationship between consumption and income at equilibrium. So I'm saying that at equilibrium, consumption is always going to be equal to income, okay? And how do we establish equilibrium? Let's look at this very simple framework. So we are saying that at equilibrium, okay, at equilibrium, sorry, along this 45-degree line, okay, along this 45-degree line, income and consumption are always going to be in equilibrium, meaning to say that consumption is always going to be equal to income along this 45-degree line, okay? But let's now bring this, so initially we started with this very simple framework here, where we're saying that consumption is always equal to income along the 45-degree line. But what we are going to do now is we're going to add the consumption function, that is the full consumption function on this diagram as well, okay? So first of all, we know that household consumption spending is made up of two components. The first component is autonomous consumption spending, which is given by this horizontal line. And we say that the consumption function is not going to start at 0 as long as autonomous consumption function is positive. That's why the consumption function is really starting at this level, of autonomous consumption spending, and then it rises, okay? The slope at which this line is, this consumption function is rising, is given by the marginal propensity to consume. So we're saying that along this 45-degree line, income is equal to consumption. So we can see that income and consumption are going to be equilibrium at this point, because they're saying at this point, the distance from 0 all the way to C0 is going to be equal to the distance from this point all the way to Y0, because income and consumption are in equilibrium. Okay, but let's look at other options that we have there, other scenarios that that we have. So I'm saying that along the 45-degree line, consumption is always equal to income. Okay, that's the equilibrium situation which we explained. Above the 45-degree line, consumption is greater than income. So when where is the consumption function above the equilibrium line? All the way from until we reach equilibrium. So all the way from this point, in other words, to the left point of to the left side of this point, we can see that the consumption function is above the 45-degree line, and we are saying that when consumption function above the 45-degree line, then consumption is greater than income. In other words, let's look at a point. Let's say that consumption and income, or let's say consumption is at this point, okay? And at that point, what is going to be the level of income? So consumption, okay, this is level of consumption, and what is going to be the level of income? So how are we going to determine that? We're going to move from this point all the way downwards to the income axis. So this is the level of consumption. So this is level of income, which corresponds to this level of consumption at this point. But we are saying this level of income here is less than the equilibrium level of income, because we're saying if consumption and income were in equilibrium, and this is level of consumption, then it means that they were supposed to meet along the 45-degree line at which point income was supposed to be at this level here, but income is now only at this point. And you can see that this level of income is less than the equilibrium level of income. So you can actually establish the same result here. It doesn't matter where you are along the 45-degree line, so along the consumption function, as long as the consumption function is above the 45-degree line. You can even come at this point here. You can say, okay, at that point, this is level of consumption, and what is level of income? Go down to the income axis, but we are saying this level of income is less than what the equilibrium level of income would be, because the equilibrium level of income is supposed to be along the 45-degree line, and the equilibrium level of income actually was supposed to be this point. So that's why I say, okay, as long as we're above the 45-degree line, consumption is really going to be greater than income, okay? And below the 45-degree line, consumption is less than income. So this is basically the opposite of the first scenario there. So we're saying as long as the consumption function is below this 45-degree line, then consumption is less than income, okay? So let's say we are at this point here. Let's say we're at this point here. What is going to be the level of income? So let's move from this point all the way to the income axis, okay? So we're just going to say it's Y star. And what is the level of consumption which correspond to this level of income? We're going to move to the consumption axis, okay? So we're just going to say C star, but we are saying this level of consumption here is less than the equilibrium level of consumption that correspond to this level of income, okay? So at this level of income, okay, what is supposed to be the equilibrium value of income? We're supposed to move all the way upwards until we intersect the 45-degree line where income is equal to consumption. At that point, this is going to be, or this was supposed to be, the level of consumption. And we can see that this sort of a level of consumption, which corresponds to this level of income along this consumption line, is less than the equilibrium level of consumption, which correspond to this level of income when income is and consumption are in equilibrium along the 45-degree line. So it doesn't matter where you are on the consumption function, as long as you are below the 45-degree line. It basically means that consumption is going to be less than income, okay? So you really have to make sure that you know and understand how to interpret this graph carefully, because it's a very, very sort of popular or testable question or examinable area, okay? So having looked at the consumption function, let's now turn our attention to the savings function, okay? The savings function. This is also something that they might test you, but I haven't seen question on savings in the recent past, but just in case, let's just go through it and make sure that we bury everything at once. Okay, so what is saving? Saving basically refers to the amount of household income which is not spent on consumption. Okay, so when you receive some of your income, let's say that you have already paid tax and you've got 100 rands. In most cases, you're not going to consume, or you're not going to spend all of these 100 rands all at once. You might actually spend 80 rand, and what is going to remain, you save it. In other words, say that, okay, I'm going to, or in other words, you put it aside for the sake of wanting to finance future consumption. So this 20 rand here is what we are now referring to saving, which is the amount of household income which is not spent on consumption. This is your household income. This one is spent on consumption. So the remainder which is not spent on consumption is what is being referred as saving. Okay, number one, consumers do not spend all of their income which they earn in a given period, that is their current income, on consumption. Some of the income is saved. That's generally the case when someone earns income, they don't consume all of it in most cases. Okay, at least the average or the typical consumer, they don't spend all their income all at once. Some of the income is going to be really saved. So we can basically say that consumption, okay, how do you determine consumption? In other words, the amount of income that is spent on consumption. Okay, so consumption is equal to the total income that you have minus the savings. Okay, so let's say that you have got a total income of 100 rands, and then you save 20 rand. What is going to be your consumption? What is the amount of income that you are really consuming? So that's going to be total income, which is 100 rands. Okay, that's going to be total income minus what is the saving, the amount of income that you are not really consuming at present. It is going to be 20 rand. So from this one, you will be able to determine what the level of consumption is. So your consumption is going to be 18. Okay, so we know that consumption, the amount of income that you spend on consumption plus the amount of income that you do not spend on consumption is going to be equal to your total income. But let's derive the saving function. Okay, we looked at the consumption function. We said that it has got two components, but we're going to use this very simple equation here to come up with the function for the savings. Okay, so firstly, we're saying that consumption is equal to income minus S, which is basically substituting letters for into this sort of weighted or algebraic expression. Okay, but if we try to rearrange here, okay, we're trying to rearrange here because we're trying to come up with the savings function. So what I'm going to do, we want to make sure that we isolate savings, okay, because we want to get the savings function, or in other words, the function or the equation for the savings for saving, okay, from this framework here. So let's just make S subject of the formula. So how are we going to do? Let's move S to the left-hand side, and then we move C to the right-hand side. So if we move S to the right-hand side, to the left-hand side, the negative sign is going to be positive. And if we move C to the right-hand side, because let's cross the equality sign, and then the sign associated with C is going to be negative. So we are actually at this point here. Okay, we are at this point there. Okay, now from there, okay, we just continue Y minus, but we know C, this is the consumption function. Remember, what is the consumption function? Consumption is called C bar plus CY. So wherever there is C, instead of writing C, we're actually going to write the right-hand side of the consumption function, C bar plus CY, which is why we have C bar plus CY. Okay, in other words, we're saying income minus consumption, but we know that our consumption is really made up of autonomous consumption plus in-use consumption. Okay, from there now we simply need to introduce this negative sign into the brackets. So the C here is becoming negative because we're saying Y minus C, and then where there was positive sign, that is on autonomous, so induced consumption becomes negative once we distribute this equal sign inside the brackets. Okay, and then from there we just need to collect like terms, and otherwise we're going to collect anything that has got Y and put it together. So we're going to bring this Y and this other Y together, and then this C is going to remain on its own. So we're starting with negative autonomous consumption spending plus Y minus CY. Okay, from here let's just factor out Y. In other words, let's say sort of rewrite this entire expression in this way, because we simply factored y out. So this expression here and this other expression there just equal to one another. It's only that we have rewritten this one in a slightly different manner by factoring out y, because we've got y here, we also have y, so we can factor out from our high school mathematics. That's another way of rewriting this entire expression. And therefore we can see that the saving function, okay, this is the saving function because that's what we've been driving. We can see that the savings function is equal to negative C bar. Remember what C bar is? Negative, it's autonomous consumption function. So savings is equal to negative autonomous consumption plus 1 minus CY. So this is the savings function. So the savings function doesn't really have much theory, but in other words, it doesn't have its own separate theory. The savings function is really derived from the consumption, the relationship between consumption and total income, because we know that if you have got total income and you subtract some of the income that you consume, that income which remains, which you have not consumed, it's really your savings. So that's why I'm saying the savings function, it doesn't have its own separate theory. It's just a logical derivation from the relationship between consumption and income. But yeah, this is how we derive the consumption function. But otherwise, what really is interesting is this term here, negative autonomous consumption. Okay, why is it negative and what does it mean? And secondly, the slope of the saving function. So the slope of the saving function here, it is 1 minus C, okay? And it is known as the marginal propensity to save. So the marginal propensity to save is really the opposite of the marginal propensity to consume. Maybe that's what we really need to expand on, okay? But to do so, let's just look at the graph below, the graph that follows, and then we'll unpack everything step by step. So on the horizontal, on the vertical axis, we are measuring the level of saving. On the horizontal axis, we are measuring the level of income. So we can see that the savings function really has got two components. The first component is autonomous saving, which is really the negative autonomous consumption. And the second part is induced saving. But remember, as this slope of the savings function is really equal to 1 minus C, as we derived above. So we simply just substituted this 1 minus C for S. Okay, so we can see that initially the level, the savings function begins from negative territory. Okay, so because this is the intercept, so this really autonomous saving is also the intercept. In other words, the intercept is that level of saving where the saving function crosses the vertical line. So this is the intercept, and you can see that the intercept, because it is below 0, it is negative. And we, as we saw that from the derivation of the savings function, we saw that the intercept is negative C bar, okay, which is autonomous negative autonomous consumption saving. Yes, it is negative autonomous consumption spending. Okay, but as income increases, okay, as income increases, we can see that the level of saving is actually increasing. Okay, so here the level of saving is still negative. Okay, it is still negative. What basically this means is that the consumer is not really saving, but they are consuming from their past savings. Okay, but up until this level of income, okay, up until this level of income, so at this level of income, the consumer is neither consuming nor saving, because you can see that at this point here, saving, it's exactly, in other words, autonomous saving is really equal to 0. Okay, because where are they? In other words, here it simply means that what the consumer is consuming is they are really consuming all of these past savings. Okay, that's why autonomous saving is equal to 0. But now beyond this level of income, we can see that autonomous saving is really going to become positive, meaning that, okay, the consumer now has also started to build future savings. That's how you need to interpret this graph here. But let's go through the remaining notes here. The slope of the saving function S, okay, is known as the marginal propensity to save, MPS, as I said, and gives the proportion of every income received by the consumer which is saved, not spent on consumption. So it's the same way we say that if you receive a certain amount of income, you tell yourself that I'm not going to consume everything, but I'm going to take part of the this income and spend it on consumption. It's also the same the same logic to say that, okay, out of every income that you receive, you always decide that I'm always going to make sure that I save maybe 10%, 20%. And that 10% or the 20%, which is the level of income that you say you commit to saving, it is actually your marginal propensity to save. So it's exactly the opposite of the marginal propensity to consume. Now let's look at the framework for the marginal propensity to save. How do we get the marginal propensity to save? So we can see that the marginal propensity to save is really equal to 1 minus MPC. So 1 here is just the unit of income. So we're saying that if you've got 1 rand of income, okay, if you've got 1 rand of income, and then you take this proportion that you the marginal propensity to consume, in other words, the proportion out of 1 rand that you commit to consumption spending, what is going to remain is actually the proportion of this 1 rand of income which you commit to saving. That's why I'm saying that, okay, MPS is really equal to 1 minus MPC, okay, and MPC is the marginal propensity to consume. But we can rewrite the entire thing here and say that, okay, let's move the marginal propensity to save to consume to the left-hand side. So we can see that the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume is always equal to 1. Why is it always equal to 1? Because they're saying that if you've got 1 rand of income, some of it is going to be spent on consumption. That amount of income, that 1 rand, okay, that income that is not spent on consumption, it's really going to be saved. So the income that you save plus the income that you consume is always going to be equal to your total income. Okay, so let's put everything together. Let's summarize consumption and saving on this very simple framework here. So firstly, this is the consumption function, and we can see that consumption is always above 0. Why is it always above 0? Because the consumer is always going to consume a certain level of, or the consumer has got a minimum level of consumption regardless of whether their income is equal to 0. So here we're measuring along this horizontal axis, we're measuring income. So even if the income of the consumer is equal to 0, but their consumption is not going to be 0. But where is this one really coming from? As I said earlier on, some of this autonomous consumption really is being financed by the past savings here. So this one is supposed to be negative here. So you can see that at this level here, autonomous consumption is equals to autonomous saving, meaning that this level of consumption is being financed by past savings here. Okay, but as your income increases, the amount of consumption which is being financed by autonomous saving is actually decreasing. Okay, so this shape here, it shows that, okay, at this point here, for instance, at this level of income, only this one is being financed by autonomous saving, but the rest here, the rest of the triangle here is being saved. Okay, so as income increases, we can see that as income increases, okay, as I say that we are measuring income along this horizontal axis. So as income increases, what happened to saving? Saving is also going to increase because the slope of the saving function is positive. Okay, so this entire thing is the marginal propensity to save. Okay, or we could actually just have written by a small letter C just to make it similar to the consumption function. But what is really important is that you just look at the plus sign. The plus sign shows that this entire thing, the slope of the saving function is positive, meaning to say that when income increases, savings is also increasing. Okay, at the same time, the slope of the consumption function, okay, which is this is the slope of the consumption function, the marginal propensity to consume, it's also positive, meaning when income increases, consumption also increases. So both savings and income, they increase. So both consumption and saving, they increase as income increases. Okay, so this is something that's really important also to make sure that you do understand it, because they are popular testable areas, but not really so much about savings. But just in case they try to throw something which is going to trick you, you have to make sure that you do understand this framework here. Okay, so that's it regarding household consumption spending as well as savings. So saving is not something independent because we derive it from the relationship between consumption and income. But otherwise, in our next session, we're just going to look at the second component of aggregate consumption spending, which is investment spending, when we meet in our next session. All right, thank you. We're going to end here.